What's going on, Guardians? It's Tizzle here. In today's video, I'm going to be teaching you how to perfectly optimize your builds in Destiny 2. So ever since Armor 2.0 came out all the way back in Shadowkeep, I've been hoarding god roll armor pieces for certain builds, and these god rolls have changed over time. Back in the day, Intellect was actually a stat you wanted, and Resilience was only useful on Titans. But now, Intellect is basically useless, especially in PvE, and Resilience is pretty much the strongest stat in the game. And for high-end PvE, you definitely want to be running 100 Resilience at all times. As a result of these ever-changing stats in Destiny 2, I have compiled more high-stat armor than I know what to do with. And then, in the Witch Queen, Bungie started introducing 3.0 subclasses. And these subclasses have certain fragments that will give you a plus or minus to a certain stat. For instance, Echo of Undermining is the most useful fragment on Void in my opinion, but it costs you minus 20 to your Discipline stat. So if you had a nice double or triple 100 build before, well, now you may only have 80 in the Discipline stat, but obviously you want your Discipline to be as high as possible so you can have more frequent grenades so you can debuff more targets. Conversely, maybe you use the stat bonuses from Solar to get triple 100s on a character. I was able to do this with Starfire Protocol last season. However, I didn't necessarily want to run those fragments because they didn't synergize as well with the build, even if they did help my stat distributions. So my vault has been sitting full of over 350 armor pieces for a long time now. I know this is excessive, but I like to be optimized with every build I run. However, a lot of that old armor from Shadowkeep was no longer being used, but I just never took the time to get rid of it or see if it fit into any of my builds. Additionally, I had pre-saved loadouts on Destiny Item Manager or DIM, and I had a lot of them. So I didn't know what fit where. So with the advent of Arc 3.0, that rounded out the updates to all the subclasses. And I told myself when all the 3.0 subclasses were out, I was finally going to sit down and organize my armor and optimize the builds that I actually use. There is no reason for me to be hanging on to 4 Wormhusk Crowns and 5-6 Coyotes. I'm not kidding, I had 4 or 5 of multiple exotics on all my characters. So recently, I sat down for a night and I curated all my builds. The builds that I use often on every character on every subclass. For instance, my Controverse Hold Warlock, I used to have 100 Recovery and 100 Discipline, even with Echo of Undermining, but now I just need a 100 Resilience and 100 Discipline build. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down every tip and trick that I use to rid my vault of about 200 armor pieces. I went from roughly 380 pieces to about 180. We'll be giving stat explanations and what I look for in builds. We'll be talking about Artifice armor, talking about dim loadouts, and how to quickly and easily optimize as fast as possible. So let's get into it. The first and most important thing to know for doing any of this is 2 websites, d2armorpicker.com and destiny-itemmanager.com. God bless the beautiful people who put these websites together, they are a godsend. The links to these websites will be in the description of this video. So first, we have d2armorpicker.com. This website is absolutely incredible. It allows you to select the exact type of build you want to make, and then it will go through all of your armor and see what pieces you have to make it work. So for instance, if you want a 100 Resilience and 100 Strength build with Peregrine Greaves as your exotic, you can put that in, and it will show you all the combinations of armor and their stats that you have to make that happen. Usually, you want your certain stats like high strength and resilience, and then it will also show you what your other stats would be with that armor. You can organize this in terms of most to least. So you could select recovery and it will show you your double 100 stat build with the highest recovery you can get. You can also select tiers, and this is the overall total stats of your build. So typically, the higher the tier the better because you will have overall more stats, but this is not always the case. If you had a high tier build, but it had high mobility and intellect and you don't want those stats, then it may be worth dropping a tier or 2 for stats that you actually want. It all comes down to personal preference and what you are trying to accomplish with certain builds. Anyways, D2 Armor Picker is extremely handy and cool, but it even goes further than that. If you know how you want to run a certain build, like with aspects, fragments, mods, etc., you can actually tick a box and it will incorporate those stat distributions into the build as well. Now, obviously this is very time consuming, and it pigeonholes you into one certain build, so this is where I will give my expertise and talk about the armor combinations that I try and build for. Yes, the triple or quad 100s are flashy and cool, but 100 mobility on a Titan is dumb in my opinion. I would be way more impressed by a double 100 build with certain aspects and fragments and limited wasted stats. Speaking of stats wasted, you can check certain boxes to reduce your wasted stats. and even to assume that your armor is masterworked, which is really nice so you don't have to masterwork some old armor piece that you aren't sure you will actually need. The amount of things you can do on this site is actually incredible. You'll have to play around with it on your own to learn everything that you can do, as I won't be showing every single feature in this video. What I am going to talk about is what I did recently and why it worked so well for me. So my whole philosophy for making my builds was to have 100 resilience and 100 discipline as much as possible, with as few general mods as possible. Grenades are extremely powerful, and 100 resilience giving 40% damage reduction is borderline broken, and it makes surviving in GMs and day 1 raids easier than ever. So I can't recommend both of those stats enough. And then from there, I try and just have a good balance so my builds aren't lacking a ton in anything. For Warlock, after those main 2 stats are checked off, I like to spec into Recovery for a faster Rift cooldown. For Titan, I build into Strength next. And then for Hunter, it is quite hard, but I try and spec into as much mobility as possible. Mobility is amazing on a Hunter for a fast dodge cooldown, and so many things on a Hunter revolve around the dodge. Going invisible, granting yourself Radiant, or getting your melee ability back with Gambler's Dodge. But with the way armor drops, it is hard to get both high mobility and high resilience. But just do the best that you can. I found Hunters the hardest to do this for, and I wound up keeping the most Hunter on my armor out of any of my characters. You can actually select armor limitations in D2 Armor Picker as well, so say you don't want a general mod on your class item, you can actually select that. This is important because there are often really strong class item artifact mods, so you don't want your stat distributions getting wrecked if you are relying on a general mod on your class item. Hell, you can choose to have no stat mods on any armor and see if you can make a double 100 build still work. And that is what I chose to do. Some of my builds may not look impressive in the stat category, but that really doesn't matter. You have way more build flexibility if you don't have to slot in general stat armor mods to get your stats up. You can then focus on things like elemental well mods that are stronger than they have ever been. And this flexibility in my builds is what I had in mind the night I made all of these builds. My Solar Titan can get 100 resilience and 100 discipline with barely any help from general mods. Maybe a minor resilience mod here or there. That opens up a lot of energy in the other mod slots to make some powerful builds, and my stats won't suffer because of it. And then, if you do have extra space, just toss in some strength or recovery or intellect mods. Why not? But it is very nice to have that be an option and not be mandatory. So that covers the overall philosophy and how I made my builds. I had certain things in mind and wanted as little help as possible from general stat mods. But how do you actually make the builds? Well, that brings us to our next website, Destiny Item Manager, or DIM. So when you have found the perfect armor for your build in D2 Armor Picker, you select Copy DIM Query to Clipboard. You then paste that link in the Search tab. It will highlight the pieces you need for the build. You then double click on each piece and it will slot it onto your character. From there, I select the mods I want if it is a specific build, and then save the loadout. If it is not specific and you just want good stats, say on something like Transversive Steps, then you can just save the loadouts straight up. Then anytime you want to run your Transversives, it won't swap your weapons or your subclass or anything. It will just equip your high stat, well optimized gear and away you go. But for something like Geomag Stabilizers, you obviously want that on Arc with Chaos Reach, so you can save the subclass. I tend to never save the weapons or the general slots because I don't like my emblems and weapons getting switched out on me when I just want to run a certain exotic piece. Even the fragments switching can sometimes be annoying. It really just depends on how much you want to optimize your builds. You could make hundreds of builds in DIM if you wanted. Well, there could actually be a limit, I don't know for sure, but I used to have a ton saved, so I know it can be a lot. But I deleted them all when I started this and made my new builds from scratch, and it was well worth it. I now have 20 builds on my Warlock, basically a build with optimized stats for any piece of exotic armor that I regularly use. And then a specific build for each subclass that I most often use. So fragments, mods, etc. on things like Crown of Tempest for Arc, Starfire Protocol for Solar, Controverse Hold for Void, and Eye of Another World for Stasis. I'd wanted to do this for a long time to organize my characters in my vault, but I had to wait for all the subclasses to come out to see what I liked running for each class and subclass. So once you know that and have a firm grasp on how you want to build for the content that you run, then you are good to go. Personally, I like to solo dungeons and GMs, so the stats I talked about are what I find valuable for how I play. But if you love PvP, then you may spec completely opposite to me. You may go for high mobility for strafe speed, high recovery for quick health regen, and intellect to have the first super of the match. But this video is to show you how to do it. And that brings us to the next step, How do you keep track of the armor that is in builds and know what you can and can't delete? So first things first, go into loadouts in dim and delete all your pre-built loadouts. You don't have to do this, but you will see why I did it. Once that is done, go into your vault and your character's inventories and go over each and every armor piece and select it so that it can be dismantled. This is very important to do. You want nothing saved because if you have something saved, you won't remember if it was in a build that you just made or not. So I stress, have no armor saved before you start this. Then simply start making your loadouts in D2 Armor Picker and dim. Every time you complete a loadout, save those armor pieces so you don't accidentally delete them. Then rinse and repeat this for every build you want to make. Again, I had like 4 or 5 exotics of the same piece, so this helped me narrow down to 1 or 2 exotic armor pieces to keep. Then I deleted the rest even if they were masterworked. They were good in the past, but in the day of 40% DR from resilience and OP grenades and 3.0 subclasses, they were simply no longer needed. They had served their purpose. Once you have all of your builds made, then what I did was I double checked my builds so I made sure I didn't delete any armor piece that I might need. So I re-equipped the builds with dim and double checked I had every armor piece that was in a build saved. I then went through my characters in the vault and deleted every single armor piece that was not saved. I deleted about 60 pieces per character. My character inventories have never been so clean. I usually only had about 1 or 2 open slots available at any one time. It absolutely sucked. And then it freed up a ton of space in my vault too. It felt amazing. It probably took me 2 hours per character, so about 6 hours total. Hunter was definitely the hardest just because in some cases you will want mobility and others resilience. So I had to keep some high stat armor for both. But on my Titan, it was shocking how much I could get rid of and how many builds I could make that were very good stat distributions with the same few armor pieces. Lastly, say you are a high-end player and are wondering about Artifice armor. There are very few places Artifice armor is actually useful, at least with the way I play. I do highly recommend having all of your class items be Artifice, because stats don't matter on those, and because the majority of artifact mods actually go on your class item. At most, maybe you want 1 Artifice piece for every armor slot just to have around in case you actually need it. Helmet is nice, but if it came down to it, I would rather have good stat distributions over an extra perk slot. For instance, this season we have Inferno Whip on the helmet. Well, on my Solar Titan, I often run double hands-on and Inferno Whip. This is extremely strong, but at the end of the day, this is only because the Artifice piece happens to fit in with my stats. If I had to sacrifice 100 resilience to make that happen, I simply would not do it. I would just run a regular armor piece with 1 hands-on mod. So it certainly depends on the role of your Artifice piece and also how you play. Are you really going to need that extra slot? In very few cases, honestly. But one where I will not compromise is on my Warlock. My Starfire Protocol build could have such better stats, but I have to run subpar gloves because I need to run an Artifice piece. Why? So that I can run fastball with my fusion grenades while also running 2 champion stunning mods. But this is a very niche case. But again, I know this. And in dim, you can actually select Artifice for a certain piece, such as gloves, and it will put that in the build. The other thing is, with Starfire, I don't need better recovery anyways because grenade kills get my rift back for me. So if I run fastball, it will help me hit my target more, allowing me to kill more consistently and get more rifts. So I'd rather have fastball and lower recovery than higher recovery and no fastball. But again, that is because I know how I personally play and what my preferences are, and also how that build in particular works and why I don't need high recovery. Controverse Hold, on the other hand, I never run fastball. I actually prefer no fastball on most grenades other than fusion grenades. So yes, it comes down to the individual, but for me, I don't care about Artifice too much outside of class items in very specific niche cases like my Starfire build. But in most cases, it's better to get good stats and have no extra mod slot in my opinion. Anyways, now that that rant is over, let's give a quick recap of the way to do this. Unsave all your armor. Go to D2 Armor Picker. Select a build with the stats you want. Copy that build when you have perfected it. Paste it into dim. Equip the armor, save the armor. Remember to save it so you do not accidentally dismantle it. Rinse repeat until you have all your builds set. Then, delete any armor that is not saved. Once you have done this mass purge, then you don't really have to do the unsaving thing every time. If you get a new good stat roll on an exotic piece in the future, you can use those sites to make a better build, but you don't have to get rid of all your old armor. but if you see it slowly beginning to pile up again and take up a bunch of space, then you may have to do this all over again. Or until Bungie nukes resilience and makes something else the best stat in the game. Who knows? But for now, I highly recommend doing this. I know it is a big time commitment, but if you are anything like me, it will save you a ton of time in the long run. Now, if I have to run Aeons in something, I simply click Aeons in dim and let the build load. Then I tweak a couple mods or aspects for the certain type of activity I'm about to do, and I go to town. I don't have to try and piece together nice stat distributions out of all the armor that I have on my character. I can simply click a button and away I go. And then all the extra character inventory slots and extra vault space has been such a nice change, and it was sorely needed. Anyways, I hope this video helped you. Maybe you were unaware of these amazing websites or just didn't know where to start when it came to optimizing all your armor and what the best way to go about it was. If you found this video helpful or informative, then dropping a like would be greatly appreciated. And if you want to see more helpful Destiny 2 content in the future, feel free to subscribe. But anyways, if you made it this far in the video, then I thank you so much for watching. Happy build optimizing and take care.